Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots. Now for a long time I've had this really warped idea of getting a classic Scalextric XR3i or Escort Mark III around Crow Valley in less than 50 seconds. Now that sounds like a crazy idea, and it probably is. But the way I see it, there's two different ways to do it. There's the really hard way, which is taking the standard car and its chassis and doing every trick in the book to it, including putting a pod in it, and try to hustle it around with all its challenges, doing it like that. And then there's the easy way, which is the way I intend to try and do it in this video. And that is to take the standard slotted HRS chassis and stick it straight underneath the Escort body. Obviously we're going to have to fully lighten the body and do all the tricks to it anyway, but that's the way that I intend to try and do it in this video. So take this chassis and stick it underneath this car and see if we can get it round Crow Valley in less than 50 seconds. So what I intend to do is get you on my table. I'll show you the chassis that I've got for those that haven't seen it already, and I'm going to show you the car that we're going to be using, and we'll go through it all, and then we'll hit the bench and we'll hit the track and we'll see if we can turn this rather aging poor car into something quite handy. Okay, so here we have the 1980s Scalextric Escort Mark III or Escort XR3i. As you can see, it's completely standard and it's also very much worse for wear. So whatever we do to this car will actually improve it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a lightweight interior out of Lexan and a lightweight glass set. I'll also be adding a co-driver and a spare wheel to turn this interior into a rally interior, and I should be offering the glass and the two different types of interiors for sale on my website if you should choose to buy them. So also what we're going to be doing is thinning down this body till it weighs a fraction of what it weighs now. So talking about what does it weigh now, let's find out. We're starting with 27.3 grams. So that's quite heavy. So hopefully by the time we've thinned this body down and changed the interior and glass, should be able to get this body down much lower. How low, I'm not entirely sure, but we'll go as far as we can. So with regards to the chassis, what we're going to be doing with the chassis is this. Gone, because we don't need it. What we're going to be using instead is this slotted HRS inline chassis. So for those of you that haven't seen this chassis, it's basically a one-stop shop for performance chassis from Slotted, and they are very good. They've got all the tricks that you could ever want, and they're fully adjustable. As if you've got a complete pod, we've got sensible gearing, alloy back wheels, nylon front wheels, adjustable front end, in width and length and everything basically. They're really good chassis and they perform extremely well. They also come with really good tyres straight out the box as well. It also comes with a 25k motor if I'm not mistaken. They're very quick and very good. So this gives us a really good base to work with. Not only do you get the car, you also get a load of extras as well. So you obviously get the pods that mount the chassis to the body. You also get a different width front end. You also get a front beam that's separate from the guide as well if you need to separate the axle from the guide. There's a whole host of extra things in here. You even get a set of wheel centers in there so you can actually make your wheels look pretty, because as they stand at the moment, they're just empty discs. So that's a really good base for a performance. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and use the original wheels that came with this car, and I'm going to put these wheels into the center of those. Now these are slightly difficult because that wheel is actually smaller than the actual wheel itself on the car, but I'm sure a small gap isn't really going to matter, and really we're going to go for a time rather than aesthetics with this car. I just want to include these telephone dial wheels because I want to try and maintain as much of the originality of the look of the car as possible. So that's the only real reason we're going with these wheels. I'm not trying to make them fit absolutely brilliantly, I'm just trying to give it a flavour of the original car. But also, not only are we going to use this chassis, but also going to be fitting the chassis with this, which is a slotting plus suspension kit. So these simply, you've got three different types of spring in that packet there, medium, hard and soft, and all they do is they replace these back bolts here, so you've got a certain amount of suspension in the car, because I've found that suspension is absolutely critical if you want to go fast on any sort of performance slot car. So this particular chassis is going to give me a few problems, because if you put that on there, you'll see that we instantly have a width issue. So that's not going to be a problem on this side of the chassis, but it's going to be a huge problem on this side of the chassis. So I'm going to have to make some sort of bar that runs down the side of the chassis here, comes in really close to the wheel, back of the wheel, and then comes and terminates on the back of the chassis there to stiffen up, because this particular bar is going to have to go if I've got half a chance of getting this wheel width down. So the front end is also the same problem, but it's easier to solve. We can literally cut away these outer rails and then move these wheels right the way in, and then we'll just have to remount this guide in a different way and then create a new mount for that front axle. So something to think about, definitely not impossible. So hopefully we'll be able to marry this chassis with this body just like that, and then get it round Crow Valley in less than 50 seconds. Right, let's go to the bench and try and do it. Okay, so as you can see, I've rushed ahead and I've completely finished the body and all the interior parts and the windscreen. And the reason why I haven't recorded any of this is because it's exactly the same process as I did about 12 to 13 videos ago. I'll put the link to the video right here. So if you want to see exactly how I did this car, just follow that video there, and it's absolutely identical. The only thing that I've changed is the shape of the body. The whole process of making the masters, thinning the body down and getting all these components made is absolutely identical to that video right there. So skip back a few videos and have a watch of that if you want to see how I did this. So this particular body here has now got its glass in, and as you can see, all I've done is I've chopped out a nice big square out the top of the Lexan, and I put some silver foil tape in there, and that now holds the glass in. There's a little tiny bit of tape there and a little tiny bit of tape there. So this body actually started off at 16.3 grams bare. So what have we got now with just the glass in? It's now 12 grams on the nose. So I actually weighed the body beforehand. The picture is just there, and that actually weighed 10.6 grams after I'd thinned it down. So it's come down from 16.3 to 10.6 grams. That's a saving of 5.7 grams just in this body. So that's basically lost a third of its weight, and it really does feel like it. So here is the double interior that I've made, because this original car came with a single interior. In fact, let's start with that one. So this is the single interior that it came with, and I've obviously smoothed it all off and I've made a vacuum form of it. So there is your completely standard Escort interior as came with this car. And then what I've done is I've taken the wheel from the Focus and I've duplicated a mold from the driver and put him on this side, and I've given the driver a bit more of a pronounced steering wheel because the standard one isn't very round, and I've left the original one with a flat top because to my eye it looks more like a piece of paper. So here is the interior that I've painted as a rally interior. As you can see, I've put a little parcel shelf in there as well that lines up with the rear C-pillar. Some idea of like a fuel tank. I know it's not prototypically correct, but I don't really mind it. It just gives a little bit of interest through the window, that's all. Just something to break up the monotony of the empty space. Got a spare wheel in there, you know, just to give a bit of interest. Pair of drivers. And you can see the slightly more rounded steering wheel on the driver there, and that's how he comes as standard. To me, it's way too flat, looks like paper, so that's his notes, and that works really well. And all I've done, I painted it up obviously, and I've just drilled some holes where needed, and I've put some sign writing vinyl, stripped it up to act as seat belts, and I've just tucked it around on the inside and glued it in place. So that's your standard rally interior. And then here is the glass that I've made. If I can pick it up, it's just a piece of glass. It all fits well. It was taken, the master for this was taken straight off the original glass for the car, obviously turned into a vacuum form that I can actually use. And I put a little shelf on the front of it here so that when it goes into the body, you've got this nice little overlap that comes down onto the bonnet. That's very useful for a little bit of double-sided if you wanted to. But also I've left a piece at the back as well. I think that's quite important really. You don't have to have it, but it helps. So when you come around the back of the glass, just leave yourself a sort of 5 mil or so, and that's just about enough to sort of come around on the back of the car, and then you could put a bit of tape on there. If you chop them off front and rear, it's not the end of the world, because like I say, I've just gone in the top of mine and on the sides as well, and that does the job perfectly well. So all we need to do to fit the interior in is just exactly the same process as the glass. Get it in place, get it where you want it, and I use silver foil tape to bond it all in, and I'll just do that now, and then I'll show you this actually finished with its interior in, and we'll take a final score. And there we are. That's the new interior all in and looking quite reasonable, I think. Not too bad. I'm quite happy with the way it's all turned out. It looks pretty good replacement for the original interior. And there's the underside, a couple of bits of foil tape front and back, a couple of extra bits on the side just to keep it all in place. And there you are, all looking quite reasonable. So how much does it weigh? Well, we started off at 27.3 grams and we're now down to 13.7 grams ready to go. So it's 13.7 grams down from 27.3. I think we can all agree that's quite an improvement and should make a big difference to the car. So these two interiors here, along with the glass, I'm actually offering for sale on my website if you should choose to be so mad enough to convert this old Scalextric car into something a little bit better. So I got the link to all these products in the description below on this video. So if you're interested in either of these two types of interior, there's a link below. So we've got the standard single seat as comes with the car as original, and we've got the rally version as well, and they both come with a nice glass as well, so you get the pair of them for the price. So with this all done now, it's time to turn our attentions to the chassis. Okay, so next we'll move on to the chassis. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, we got some problems to overcome with this chassis because it's fundamentally too wide for the body we want to put it into. So the first thing we're going to do is remove this bar from the chassis. But in order to do that, I need to reinforce the chassis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this rib that runs through the chassis here with this piece of brass bent at 90 degrees. So it'll run down this portion of the chassis here, around this bearing with a little slot in it so the pod can still move up and down. And the back end of this brass will land on the back end of this chassis here. So that means then that I'll have to glue and rivet this piece of brass in using these rivets. Now, I was actually asked a few videos back how I actually use these rivets. So when I get to the riveting section, I'm going to stop and I'm going to explain all about the rivets and how I do them and why and where you can get the parts from. But first of all, let's have a go at trying to bend up this brass and getting it laying into the chassis first, and then we'll come back and we'll take it from there. Okay, so with the brass side all now made and fitting into the chassis, it's now time to think about riveting. Now, I was asked about rivets in an earlier comment in one of my earlier videos, so I just thought I'd take the time to show you now. So there's a great big steel rivet, and here are my small brass rivets, and you can get long, small steel ones, you can get long copper rivets, like that one there. You get all different sizes of rivets in all different types of materials. You can get aluminium, you can get copper, brass, steel, and so on and so forth. So that's what these actually are. They come from an engineering supplies, and you can get them on eBay as well, but they're primarily used in model engineering to make boilers and to fasten all sorts of metal sheet together when you're making model locomotives and so on and so forth. But they're very useful for doing this small stuff as well. But you must be careful because obviously the plastic doesn't accept a rivet all that well. So when you're peening a rivet over, you've got to be careful how you peen it, because if you normally you would open up one of these holes into a countersink and then you'd pin the rivet down into the countersink. But obviously with plastic, you can't do that because the plastic will move as the metal moves out. The rivet won't stay contained inside the countersink. So you've got to be very, very careful in how you rivet plastic together. So the way that I do it is I sometimes flat the top of this rivet before I go into the work, and I'll put that pre-shaped side into the plastic first, like that there. So that means then I've already got really good contact on the plastic and I don't need to pin it onto the plastic. So when the metal goes on, what I'm going to do then is I'll then pin it into the metal itself rather than into the plastic. So when it's like that, you just chop it off a little bit longer than you actually want as it comes through the brass, and then you use a concaved punch like this, and that concave punch is designed to fit in the head of the rivet. Once you've got it like that, you then use a flat punch to just punch or flatten out the rest of the rivet that's poking up above the work on the metal side. You can do it the other way around, but you've got to be very, very careful, because as that metal swells, it will actually swell the plastic as well. If you punch it from this side, hit it from this side and pin it over from this side, you've got to be really, really careful. But to be safe, dome side or flat side, whatever side you really want, on that side there, and then you just other flat punch straight down on top, and it mushrooms out the metal here and it bonds it all into place. So the way that I'm going to fix this particular piece here, I've got 2 rivets on here, 1 rivet on the back. I'm going to use the round faces on the underside, but flat them off first, so they're not domed, they're just going to be a flat. And then I don't need to use my concave punch because there's no need to, so I could just put that on a flat punch and then just tap it over, mushroom out the top on all ends. And the way that I should do it before I start riveting is I should be putting a bit of glue on the underside, a bit of super glue on the underside of this first, so it bonds it down first, and then I'll put the rivets in and pin it into place. And as you can see, with that in place there, I've actually got really good movement on my pod as well. So once this has been glued and riveted into place, I can then bring my wheel up and I can trim away whatever I don't need, whatever is in my way, to get the wheel nice and close. Obviously these plastic bars this plastic bar here is going to be gone, but we got all this metal work then all ready to go to accept the pressure that bar is let go. It's all going to transfer through this aluminium brass plate extremely nicely. We've got a decent amount of contact on the back, a lot of contact down the side here, but there's not a lot of transfer coming through this bar really. There's not a lot of pressure. This bar is really only supporting this corner of the chassis, and there's a lot more strength in this brass than there ever is in that little tiny bit of plastic there. So this will be absolutely perfect, and obviously it's going over the bearing, so we're not losing any width, we're actually maintaining the width of the bearing itself. So let's crack on, let's get some glue on this, get it on there, and then we'll pin over all these rivets, and then we can let it set and then get the wheel on and get it all fitting up really, really nicely. Okay, so that's the brass plate all riveted and glued into place, and I ended up using 5-minute epoxy on the brass plate because I didn't want to have to deal with fast setting super glue. So there we are. So that is all riveted into place, all clearance for the wheel, and it now fits great, and we've still got lots of nice pod movement. So at this point now we can actually put all the drivetrain back in and think about putting the suspension in. Now, as you've probably seen all through this part of the segment here, I've actually removed the 2 screws that hold the pod in the back because they're just going to get in the way while we're setting all this lot up. But it's this point now where we can put those bolts back into the build, because now we're going to fit the rear suspension. So there we are. So that is the back end all back in place, and you can see we've now got nice and even tyre position, wheel position, and it's all nicely as it should be. If we put it up on the setup plate and then run the line through the middle, we can see that each tyre is in exactly the same segment relative to either side, and that's all correct. So onto the suspension. So as I said before, this is the suspension set that I'm using, and it comes with 4 uprights with 4 caps and 3 different types of spring, hard, medium and soft. So here are the springs, being careful not to lose them. There we are, there is the soft spring right there. And the way we fit these in is really, really easy. Sometimes you might have to adjust the size of the hole in the bottom there. In this particular instance, I don't need to at all. They actually fit perfectly. So you can just pop them in and then pop on a spring and then a cap. Got to be very careful here not to lose all these parts because they're actually very springy and they do like to disappear off the top of the spring into the carpet, and you'll never ever see them again. So I've just nipped them up a little tiny bit there, and you can just spin them up, and they've got a certain amount of adjustment to them, so you don't need to worry too much. Now what I normally do with these is I normally make shims to stop the travel of these suspension units, and I can actually control. Sometimes I make a brass shim, sometimes I'll make a plastic shim. It just depends on how I feel at the time. In this particular case, I'm not going to use either because my pod is actually limited by the travel, limited by that brass plate I've just put in. So I don't need to worry too much. So there we are. So there is both of the rear suspensions in, and I'll just adjust them down to somewhere around even there. And there we are. It's really that simple. And now we've actually got suspension in the car. So if I can get it a little bit better for you there. There you go. So there it is, all there working. Now, really, I say you should really limit these bolts here from moving side to side, but these aren't going anywhere because the pod is trapped in the cradle here. It's not really going anywhere. It's not going to make much difference. So if you did glue these screws into place or whatever, it'd be slightly better, but I don't think we need that much precision. And as you can see, we got plenty of movement. That brass is clearance. Let's take that wheel off just to show you. That wheel has got good clearance as it travels in amongst that that brass there, as you can see. There, let's just show that. There you go. Look. So you've got plenty of movement there. And all I've done is I've cracked off these 2 front bolts here to give me a little tiny bit of slack, just enough to move. And now you've got nice suspension. So that is the back end completely finished. Now I don't think we've finished with the back end entirely, because even though I've got absolutely the maximum width of these back wheels, are minimum width as I can possibly get, I still don't actually think I've got quite enough on the back wheels. I still want them a little bit closer together. So the only way to do that now is to actually remove a little bit of material from this front of this wheel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove about 50 thousandths of an inch. No, not that much. Maybe 25 thousandths of an inch, about just over 0.5 millimeter on both sides. And if you can see, these tires are just slightly overstepping the wheel. So what I'm going to do, once I've machined off about 25 thou off the front of that wheel, about 0.5 millimeter, just over, I'm going to put the wheel on. I'm going to put the scalpel in the lathe, and set my scalpel blade up to the front of the new wheel front. Then I'm going to put the tire on, and then I'm going to go in with the blade, and I'm going to cut the tire down to actually get the tire to match the wheel, because at the moment the wheel is a little bit too deep, and so is the tire. The tire overshoots the wheel more than I want it to, and that between all of these modifications, I should just about get enough clearance to get both of these wheels tucked up inside the arch. As you can see, that one there is kind of roughly where you want it, I guess, and we're still not quite there on this side. So let's take these wheels off, let's skim them down and then trim these tires up, and then we can see how we're fitting, and I think we'll be done then on the back end. Okay, so by taking 25 thou off the wheel and then all the excess tire, how much width did we actually gain per side? We gained about 50 thou, which is 1¼ mil per side. So we're now at roughly 48 mil. If I swap that over, you can see, there we are, about 48 mil. So does it now fit in the wheel arches of our Escort? Yes, it does. There we go. That's a nice amount of tuck. I wouldn't want it to go any deeper or any wider. And we've got exactly the same on the other side. So we've now got room for the wheel to tuck up for the suspension to work. So that is genuinely the back end done. So now we can move on to the front end. So let's deal first of all with the guide, because I think that's going to be the easiest thing to deal with. So if we take the front wheels off, we can really see what's going on with the guide. These are just a pull fit on these front wheels. So there we are. So let's get those gone and pop the wheels where we need them to be there. Okay, so that's that. Now, how much room have we got to slide back on these sliders? We have got about 12 mil. So if we take the guide and we move it back to about 12 mil, where the end of that caliper is, that's right, that's going to work. So this is going to be a simple case of just slackening off these screws just here, sliding that all the way to the back, and then nipping it up and just seeing what we've got at that point. And hopefully the guide will be within the body. So if we line up the back wheels to there, it is easily. So what we can now do, slacken those off again, and then we can move this guide all the way to the front. And the longest possible distance within reason is what you want for a decent handling car. The shorter that triangle, the more twitchy the car becomes. So the triangle would be the distance between the guide and the back wheels. Where the front wheels are is relatively irrelevant as far as slot cars go. It's this triangle between the guide and the back wheels, because those are your contact points, not really the front wheels. So really what you want is the guide up front as far as possible to get a really nice stable handling car. Now obviously remember the corners swing out, so you don't want to go too far, and that's just kissing the body. So we could probably come back just a hair from that, and then we can make a note, and there we are. That's probably enough now. You don't need much. And then just nip him back up again. And there we are. Double check the back wheels and the arches, which is nice. And there we are. So now we've got just the right amount of clearance on the inside of that body. So that's basically the guide done. We can nip up these nice and tight now, and then we can think about getting the front wheels sorted out. So what we'll do with that, the front wheels are a little bit easier than the back wheels. So if we just take the width of those back wheels there now, it's 48 mil more or less exactly, and we just move these axles in so that we can get that clearance. So there we are. That is more or less it, just more or less there. That's good enough to go for now. And now we can see, yes. So what we now need to do is we need to trim these outer rails off completely so that that axle will fit back where we need to. So we basically just need to clearance it all. And I don't know if those screws are going to get in the way. I hope not, but we can work that out. So let's just trim off these axles, these bars here first. We'll give ourselves all the room at the front, just in case we might need it. So I'll chop off the fronts, chop off the inners, and we'll come back and we'll see where we are after that. Okay, let's not chop up this front end just yet, because I think this is a great opportunity to show you the contents of what else comes with this chassis, because there's a lot going on here and it's well worth noting. So obviously here is your chassis. So with this kit you get this standard triangle here which holds the guide and the axle all in one, and as I showed you just a minute ago, you slack it off those screws and you can move the whole thing. But what happens if you want the guide in a different place from that axle? In this case I need to chop it all out, but that's by the by, that's for this build. Well, then you get this piece here. So this piece here goes into your chassis and goes there. It is actually able to slide somewhere else, and then to hold that down they also give you these two screws, these two nuts and these two washers, which mimic exactly what's already on the car. So that gives you a great range of opportunity. I mean, if you really wanted to, I guess you could put it up the front as well, but whatever. So that is for the narrowest setting, which still isn't narrow enough for this particular build, unfortunately, but that's just the quirk of this particular job. But then you get the other sets as well in the kit, which are actually for a wider wheelbase if you want it. And there we are there. So you're gaining about 3 millimeters on each side. So that's for the wider axle. And then you also get the wider triangle as well, which is the same width axle but also holds the guide as well, so you can move it, the axle and the guide, as one. So you get that in the kit as well, which is really handy. And you also get these side mounts, which we will be using later on in this build, and they are to obviously glue to the inside of your body, and they friction fit on the inside of the chassis just there. You trim them down to length again, which what we will be doing later on, but that they're in the kit as well. So there's a pair of those. You also get these square standoffs, which also fit into those bodies there, side rails, and then they also fit on the inside here, in case you want to chop off that one there, on that one there, and you want a narrower width. So they come with it as well, and there's 4 of those. You also get all the grub screws, which go in the bottom adjuster for the axle and the top adjuster for the axle to get your height right on the front axle. And you also get 4 of these. Now, honestly, I don't actually know what they are. So there's a little pip in the middle of that one, and they're round on the other side, and they're open-ended on the ends. Now, if anybody in the comments knows what these are, I'd be very grateful for you to tell me what they're actually for. I'm sure I could work it out eventually, but I'm not quite sure what they are. But whatever they are, you get 4 of them, and I'm sure it makes the chassis much nicer when you've finished. So anyway, so that, oh, and also you get 6 wheel centers. There's 2 with the holes all the way through, presumably so that you can push them right to the back of the wheel and go, presumably, well, whatever. Maybe they don't. Maybe they go a bit more surface mounted. Let's just see, actually, I don't know. Will the wheel fit? Right, yeah, so they have to go, they can't go over that boss in the middle, but they go over the axle. So you get multiples of those, 2 of those, and then you get the standard ones with a little boss on the back, so that they actually would clip over that little tube on the inside of the wheel. So that's what you get as well. So there's a lot of stuff in this kit, and it really does make this chassis very universal, on top of all the modifications that I'm doing to this one to make it totally unique as well. So it's a really good chassis. If you want to buy a chassis to get a body powered up and you're not quite sure how it all goes together or what sizes they are, you can get one of these and you could tailor make it to yourself. And if you want to go to real custom extremes like I am on this one here, you can make these chassis do even more than what they're supposed to do. So there we are. That's a whole overview of what you get in this kit. I just thought I'd show you that before I start chopping this one up. Right, now I'm going to chop this one up. Okay, so after a little bit of messing around, I finally got my guide in exactly the right place where I'm happy with it. I did end up moving it back just a little bit further because I was really struggling to get the back axle to clear these nuts. So I just took it all apart, moved it back a little bit further, and I've locked it all up with super glue, including the threads and the nuts. So that is now permanently part of the chassis and it's not going to move. So now I've got my guide exactly where I want it, and it's clearing the axles, and I've cleared all this plastic back. The axle, or the guide, is now fully finished, so I can now turn my attentions to fitting the front wheels. Now I did actually do that tyre trick on the lathe with the scalpel just to thin these tyres down a little bit more, because we don't need width on front tyres anyway, and it helped me get between those nuts. They were just causing me a problem, but with the excess tyre trimmed off, that's no longer an issue at all. So now all we got to do now to finish the chassis is get this front axle back on this car. So the way that I intend to do that is I'm going to turn up this piece of brass rod into a bearing, a long bearing that fits between the backs of those wheels, and then I'm going to cut this piece of brass and I'm going to drill 2 holes in it, and those holes will go through those holes there in the chassis. And I've got these 2 1.2 mil, I think they're 1.2 mil Allen key countersunk screws. Don't know where I got them from. I can't remember where I got them from. I got a load of them, but they fit beautifully into those 2 holes there that used to be the adjuster holes for the axle. So they're obviously exactly the same thread as the adjuster screws for your front axle, but they're actually just a countersink bolt or screw, whatever. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to bolt this plate into those 2 holes, and it's going to come forward and meet the axle with the tube in it, and where they meet, I shall solder them together. And then that will then go back in, the axle can go together and then bolt through into those bolts, and that will hold the front end exactly where we need to. So let's turn this tube into a piece of rod, let's turn this rod into a piece of tube even, and then get this front end all fixed up. And there we are, that's the front axle all fitted. And as you saw, I soldered the brass tube to the brass plate, and then I bolted it down using those two little bolts there. And I've also added a little bit of lightening in the front there just for fun. So when you put it on the setup plate and you move the car, you get tyre movement as it should be, but also the tyres are very free to move without any real resistance whatsoever. And also with the front axle running in this enclosed tube, the wires won't rub on the axle at all. So the guide is very free to self-center without being bound up on anything. So that's the actual chassis finished. Now we've got to turn our attentions to mounting the mounts, which is going to be a little bit of a fiddling about, and I'm not going to record it because I really want to get on with this without being encumbered by keeping everything in shot and so on and so forth. But basically, all you need to do is get an idea of how wide those mounts need to be in the body. And as you can see in the case of this, they're basically the same width as the body. So really all I need to do is take away the thickness of this plate. It's really all I've got to do to this one. And also, you'll notice that there is a slight difference between the amount of plastic on either side of this pin. There's a bit more plastic on this side than this side. And because these mounts here actually sit very, very low in this car, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that amount of plastic, that the more amount of plastic pointing upwards, so that I can get as much up vertical mount up into the body. No point having it pointing down because the body needs to come up anyway. So all I need to do is trim these posts here down by the thickness of this plastic, and then trim all these posts so that everything fits nicely. There's a decent amount of depth to these pins. If I put my nail there and pull it out, you can see there's about 4 millimeters of inward travel on all of those sections there, including the rear one. In fact, there's a little bit more in the rear one. There's probably more like 5 mil on the back. So once you've got these posts down to the right height, you just need to then trim these pins down to the right height so that when the whole thing is in the case of my car, they're actually bottomed out on those posts and the body fits over nicely. Once the body is fitting over nicely and you've got these exactly where you want them and everything is completely level when you've put it on the body, then you can pick up the car carefully and add a little bit of glue, or you could even run a bit of 5-minute epoxy into the back of these, and then you can set it up with the 5-minute epoxy in place. That will probably be a better idea. And then once the 5-minute epoxy goes off, you can take it all apart and add in a little bit more epoxy in the middle if you wanted to, just to reinforce it. So that's probably what I'll do actually, rather than using super glue afterwards. I'll just set it up with a bit of wet epoxy on there, get it exactly where I want on the setup plate, then leave it for half an hour, come back, open up the body, and then add a bit more and then it should be good to go. Okay, so just before I go to glue, I thought it'd be a really useful idea to stop at this moment and show you what I've done to my little sidebars, because it might be of use. So I've chopped down these tubes to exactly the right depth, and then I've trimmed down these little pins here so that when the pins go all the way into the chassis, it gives me exactly the right width on both sides, and those pins go all the way down to the bottom of those little tubes. And that, when you put that into the body, there's just a little tiny bit of flex on the body side, so that it just puts a very small amount of pressure on the side of the body when it all goes in, so that when you put a bit of glue on there, it just makes positive contact. And then what I've done is I've put my car on a setup plate, and I found packer pieces that actually match the height of my body where it wants to be when there's glue in place. So I've got one each on the front corner and one across the back. That's going to vary from car to car, but that's what I've worked out with mine. And with these packer pieces in on the ends, gets it exactly in the right place. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to mix up some 5-minute epoxy, gently smear it on the bottom, on the top, sorry, of these side pieces, and just inside the body shell as well. I'm going to sit it down on the chassis with these packer pieces and make sure it's perfect, and then leave it for half an hour. And I'm going to come back, I'm going to add a bit more glue on the inside just to bolster it up a little bit more, and then let that go off, and then that should be the body fully mounted. Okay, so that's the body mounts all glued in with a little bit of extra glue on the top after I did the initial gluing. You could always replace these pins with some bent wire, and then you wouldn't get this panel across here. But if you knew cars from the 80s, you'd know that the sills or rocker panels are often painted black. So this isn't really anything different from that. It looks perfectly fine. And the body clips back in to the chassis really easily. All you do is you line up the 3 pins on one side, you pop them in like that, and then you line up the 3 pins on the other side, and then you can pop them in just like that. And it's nice and strong, nice and secure. No body mountings have to worry about with regards to screws or anything else, and it comes apart really quickly, just like that. Right, so the last job to do is adding some lead to this chassis. Now, I actually like to put my lead on the motor pod if it's got a pod with suspension. I don't like it on the chassis because the springs then have to control the weight, and then it goes from the chassis to the springs to the axle. I prefer to put the weight on the pod, so the weight is acting straight on the actual axle. I know there's dynamics with unsprung weight and all that lot. I just find with slot cars, the weight is better off on the pod if you've got the suspension. So we need to know how much weight we can actually fit in this car. So we need to know what the total weight of the car is. And it is basically 72 grams. Now, all my rally cars, I run at around about 90 grams. So I reckon that I've got at least 15 grams of weight that I can add directly to that pod. Now, 15 grams is quite a lot, but this car is so light, it only brings it up to just under 90 grams, which is absolutely perfect. So I'm going to cut some lead, I'm going to fit it to this motor pod, and then we'll button it up, and then we'll go to the track. Now, I know that time doesn't look particularly impressive, but one thing you've got to keep in mind is the room that track is in is 6 degrees Celsius at the moment in the middle of the UK winter. It's really, really cold, and it's amazing that I can get any grip at all from rubber tyres. So the track surface is really cold, and so are the tyres. So I was really struggling with back end grip. So to get a sub 50-second with a brand new car on a really cold track with cold tyres, I'm actually really, really impressed by that. And the chassis itself is super smooth, super quiet, really quick, really stable, and very, very predictable. And it's an absolute joy to drive. It really is. It's so much better than I thought that it would be. I would dearly have loved to have gotten the time much deeper into the 40s, of course, and I was kind of expecting that. But to be honest with you, having driven it, having felt how good it actually is, and then how cold it actually is, I'm actually very confident that if this car came out in a room, in a hall that's nice and warm, or at least the temperature was up, this car would easily do a 48 or even a 47. It really is very stable. Now, in the process of trying to get a quick lap, I did have to change the tyres a number of times because those slotted tyres just weren't giving me the grip that I was looking for. I then went to a set of PU tyres, which were better, and I ended up with a set of NSR tyres on this car, and that's what actually gave me the grip, the super sticky NSR tyres. And with those NSR tyres, she hooked up and she went. And I know from the feel of this car that in warmer conditions, she would absolutely fly. And although I was pushing the car hard, I never once rolled it. It never rolled. I only deslotted it a couple of times. The reasons why I aborted the tracks was purely because the car was just swinging all over the place. I just knew it wasn't going to be a fast time. So I took it off the track, cleaned the tyres, did some other bits and bobs, and then went back to the track. I never once rolled it, which is amazing. It's a really, really stable car. A couple of times I was going into the corner way too fast. I thought, this isn't going to end well. And it just went round. I was like, oh, okay, fair enough then. So I know this car is a really, really good car. So it'd be nice to see what it feels like on a much warmer day. Anyway, don't forget, if you want a set of these lightweight interiors and glasses, they're on my website. Links are below. And if you've enjoyed this sort of content, maybe you'll subscribe. And if you could hit the little bell button, that would be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.